Hello, and thank you for joining us on Giving Voice to Depression. I'm Bridget.
And I'm Terry. More than 350 million people worldwide suffer from depression, but you do not have to have it yourself to be affected by it. Its prevalence pretty much guarantees that someone you care about battles its darkness.
This podcast tries to shine some light into that darkness. We're not experts, and we're not therapists. We're sisters and best friends who live with depression and are committed to encouraging healthy, healing conversations about mental illness.
Hi, Bridget.
Hey, Terry. We recently posted a question on our Giving Voice to Depression community Facebook page asking members to finish this sentence. Depression is, and we left a blank. And we got the kind of insightful feedback that we've come to expect from this great group. Mm-hmm. They said, depression is dark, wicked, relentless, real, stigmatized, a nightmare, a roller coaster, a sneaky, evil shapeshifter that smothers you, Ooh. Feeling alone in a room full of people, mm-hmm. a bottomless pit.
But also replies including depression is a very powerful teacher, a strong nudge to ask for help, the turning point to a better life, and a favorite, depression is not going to win.
Not going to win.
Yeah.
Today's guest, Dr. Tim Cantopher, says his more than 30 years' experience as a psychiatrist treating patients with depression has led him to conclude that depression is the curse of the strong.
Yeah.
Yep, you heard it right. Strong, not the weak. It's the name of his book. And well, after we read it, we reached out.
Thank you for joining us, Doctor. We are always interested in exploring different perspectives on depression. And yours is both unique and refreshing.
It's always been interesting to me that it is kind of unique because whenever you go to conferences or whatever on depression, you get people talking about vulnerability factors. And it was a long time ago that I thought, well, hang on a second. You call them vulnerability factors, which makes sufferers sound like sort of feeble, whimpering people. But my experience has been completely the opposite. And if you reframe those same factors in a different way, they're actually strengths. It was always a pleasure in my career, I've retired now, to treat people with major depression because they seem to me to be the best and the nicest people and, deserving of so much more than they were getting and deserving of a very different attitude from people around them.
Dr. Cantopher says in his practice, the common traits of the people with depression he treated became so predictable, he would surprise new patients when he interviewed them.
I say to folks, look, don't tell me what you're like. I'll tell you. You're regarded by those around you as strong, reliable, diligent, with a strong conscience, strong sense of responsibility. You tend to look after other people's needs before your own. You're sensitive, vulnerable to criticism, and your self-esteem is pretty easy to knock. And it depends a lot on the evaluation of others. And they go, oh, golly, yes, how did you know that? Well, I know that because I've seen that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over.
In fact, Dr. Cantopher goes further, saying we're the kind of people to whom you'd turn if you had a problem upon which your house depended.
Yes, absolutely. I've sometimes said this as a joke, but it's not really a joke. If I were employing somebody for an important job, and if I were allowed to, I would say in the advertisement for the job, only those who've had at least one episode of major depression need apply. Because, of course, then you're going to get the very best people who are going to try their guts out for you because they're the people who get the illness.
So there's the part of me that loves to hear this because I have depression and I hate there are people out there who consider those of us with it weak when that is not how I feel. But there's also the part of me that hears this a little bit like when you're not invited to the high school dance and your mother says, oh, honey, that's because you're so special. And you think, no, it's not. So is this a like pacifying or placating those of us with depression, or this is your clinical, scientific, doctor, psychiatrist?
No, this is my passionately held view. I don't see any harm in putting a positive value on those characteristics which I personally feel positive about. It's not a question of just making people feel better. It's about enabling people to change the way that they lead their lives, really taking charge of their lives in a way that's going to make their lives better.
And that shift in perspective can be literally life-saving.
While people are seeing it as being some awful weakness and shame, they're very unlikely to present themselves for the treatment which is likely to help them. So I think it's more than just a soothing balm. This is incredibly important in my view.
Before we continue, there's a distinction Dr. Cantopher wants to make clear.
Clinical depression, major depression, is a spectrum. And, there are some folks who have what I would call the unipolar version of bipolar disorder. There are some people for whom, my model does not fit. And at its extreme, that really is genetically inherited and a biological illness. The type that really interests me, and is what I'm writing about in this book, is major depression caused clearly by stressors. And to me, that's the majority of what I saw.
And Dr. Cantopher saw a lot of patients with depression, far more than the average psychiatrist.
And I have actually done a rough calculation on that, and it's around 3,000.
And the majority of those patients, he says, were unable to look after themselves in those stressful times because their focus was elsewhere.
Which is, I saw literally thousands of these folks who were focusing so much on the needs of others, who were ignoring their own needs and feelings so much that you could see that they were in a way bound to develop this illness.
The curse of the strong, remember? Quoting from his book now, think about it. Give a set of stressors to someone who's weak, cynical, or lazy, and he'll quickly give up. So he never gets stressed out enough to get ill. A strong person, on the other hand, will react to those pressures by trying to overcome them. After all, she's overcome every challenge she's faced in the past through diligence and effort. She can't stop struggling because she fears other people might be disappointed in her. Even more, she fears being disappointed in herself. She keeps going on and on and on until suddenly, bang, the fuse blows. I want to be clear, those pronouns were the doctor's choices and not mine, by the way, not my feminism creeping in.
The fuse may blow just because you have impossible hardship in your life. But the fuse may blow because you face the hardship which you do without sufficiently taking account of your own needs because you're so busy looking after everybody else's. And that's the type that I'm particularly interested in. It's very common.
And you say in your book that blowing a fuse is not a metaphor.
No, it's not. There's very good evidence for this, that when you look at the functioning in the limbic areas of the brain, there is a chemical disturbance which happens. Now, I know that there are some people who would say, oh, this is a myth created by drug companies in order to sell their drugs. But it isn't. If you take people with major depression and look at the metabolites of the major transmitter chemicals in the limbic system of the brain, they are reduced. I don't know what you would call it, but I would call that a blown fuse.
To avoid that and to reduce the likelihood of future blown fuses, Cantopher says we need to learn a different way of facing adversity.
The sorts of changes that you can make to the way that you think and the way that you behave through effective cognitive therapy, mindfulness, or, really looking at the way that you run your life, they're incredibly important too and can increase your chances of remaining well. So, I think if you want to put it down to its most simple, you can reduce it to 3 questions. What's it all for? What I do in my life. What do I want? Where is the balance in my life? And I don't mean just work-life balance. I mean the balance between your needs and other people's needs, the balance between rest and recreation, the balance between exercise and just blobbing in front of the television. Everything is about balance. Now, if you can really answer those three questions, you've got a very good chance of remaining well. But my experience is that most people who get a recurrent episode of major depression can't answer those questions. They've never thought about their own needs or what they want because they're too busy running around making other people happy.
And that, he says, is very often a function of low self-esteem.
Many of my patients have, for one reason or another, not learnt by the time that they are 18 that they are of real worth. I think that central feeling, which is I'm okay, I am worth my place in the world, I'm worth the air that I breathe, whatever, Joe Bloggs says about me, is so protective. And I wish I could give that to every person who I saw.
And Cantopher says it's never too late to realize and accept your personal worth. But part of that process involves quieting your worst critic.
You have to recognize that your worst enemies are not out there. Your worst enemy is usually yourself. The sort of talk which you give to yourself is horrible. When you say, oh, I'm such rubbish, I'm so weak, I'm so pathetic, why can't I do what this other person can do? If you found somebody talking like that to somebody else, particularly somebody else who was in a state of depression, you would stop them and you would say, stop doing that. What you're doing is unreasonable and dreadful, and really horrible. So if it's not okay to do it to other people, why is it okay to do it to yourself?
But is that us saying it to ourselves, doctor, or is that the depression?
Yes, you're absolutely right. In the pits of depression, their negative thoughts about themselves and the world and the future were just so black as to be impenetrable. But even when well, now I accept this isn't the case for absolutely everybody, but it is those folks who put themselves at the back of the queue, both in terms of privilege and in terms of self-worth. Those are the people who I'm the most interested in because, that can change. But you really have to change it. You have to work on changing that. And while you are not more important than the next person, you are as important as them. And treating yourself with the same kindness and respect that you would offer to others, I think, is very much a key.
And that goes for how we care for ourselves when ill, too. We try to get others to understand that depression's as real as any other physical illness. But when it strikes, many of us seem to ignore that fact.
Don't try to force your way out of a major episode. You can't. It's impossible. It's like trying to force your way out of double pneumonia. In the early stages, there really isn't an awful lot that you can do other than just recognize this is not your fault and take the medical treatment and start to get a little bit better, lighten up on yourself a little bit.
Dr. Cantopher says accepting the symptoms of depression, the same way you would accept the changes in your breathing with pneumonia, will ultimately help you recover faster and more fully. So rather than pushing yourself to exhaustion, pretending you are not in depression's dark grip,
you say, I'm going to listen to my body, I'm going to do a little bit, and I'm then just going to take it very, very gradually. I use the metaphor of a stress fracture of the leg, which I think is a fairly good metaphor because that tends to happen to people who try too hard at their athletics. So when can you start exercising again? Well, after a few weeks, when do you stop exercising? Well, when it starts hurting. If you don't carry on through the pain, because otherwise you'll refracture your leg. It's the same with the limbic system. If you carry on through the pain, you'll refracture your limbic system and you'll get another episode, or you just won't get better from the episode you've got.
And by taking that approach, Cantopher says we can reduce or even avoid future episodes.
The longer you're well, the more robust the fuse gets, but it will never be so robust that you can do anything. You have to learn what your limits are. And that's the trouble, that the vast majority of people I see with recurrent major depression never change anything. They just keep going back, never asking themselves what they want and what all of this is for and where the balance is in their lives.
Cantopher says the trick is to learn to work just below your peak capacity, in a place that's sustainable.
It is absolutely sustainable. And actually, that way you get the greatest efficiency.
So to summarize his message and his book in just a few sentences.
Pace yourself, be consistent, treat yourself not better than anybody else, but the same as other people. Make some choices in your life based on, not just on other people's expectations, but what you want too. It is important. It's more than okay. It is crucial. It makes perfect sense.
Wow, Terry, look at the way you run your life.
This one impacted me in a very gentle way, but I think a fairly profound way, where I found myself, one of his tests, as he calls it, the vacuum, actually he calls it the Hoover, in the middle of the room test. And he said, when you're really in depression and you decide you still have to clean up, you start to vacuum. And when you find yourself, like that stress fracture, starting to get really tired, he said, so many of us just push through and do the whole darn house, and then we're exhausted and maybe don't feel well for a couple of days. He said, let it sit. Do something else, take a break, read whatever you do to replenish yourself. And then when you feel up to it, vacuum a little more. But you don't always have to push.
You would pick that example.
I told him I'm looking at a vacuum in the middle of my room, but I'm not depressed. Okay, so I'm not a great housekeeper, and Bridget is. There, we said it.
That's okay. Yeah, and the idea to treat yourself with kindness and respect as you would anybody else.
Mm-hmm. We don't do that. And how about those 3 questions, Bridget? What's it all for? What do I want? And where's the balance in my life? Are those questions you have asked yourself and can answer for yourself?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I know, me neither. Should be. I'll work on that.
When you're in the hold of a depression, I just am in such an unresourceful place when I'm there that I wouldn't have any idea. I don't know how to answer them now.
That's what I was going to say, but we're not in it now, and neither one of us is. Yeah, that's something to challenge.
I'm going to start with look at the way that I run my life.
Yep, I agree. That was a good one. So thank you, Dr. Cantopher. Those are good questions, and thank you for not calling us weak and for understanding that, perhaps there's a different spin on all this.
So, Terry, is it not true that I wasn't asked to prom because I'm special?
Oh, no, sweetie, you're special. You were too special to go to prom. I love you.
Bye.
Bye.
We hope that these shared stories bring out a little more understanding or help people articulate their experiences of depression a little more clearly or more freely. Thanks to everyone who's digging deep and finding the words and finding the courage to give voice to depression.
You can find all the other episodes, some resources, and a blog on our website, givingvoicetodepression.com. And you can find the podcast most of the other places that you find podcasts. Just Google it, as our mom says.
And please remember, if you're hurting, speak up. If someone else is hurting, listen up.